What's up, culture warriors, lovers of films, comics, games, and fans of everything cool? Welcome to the first official episode of Full Spectrum Culture. I'm your host, Brett R. Smith. My vision for this show is to not only highlight the Comicscape movement, but also to focus and discuss comics, movies, music, animation, world events, politics, and the broader culture war going on in America. We'll also touch on how comics are colored, as well as how we produce comics and graphic novels. We're also going to have some fantastic contributors to this show, and we have some incredible interviews coming very soon. So with that, let's jump right in. For those of you who don't know me, I have a 27-year career in the comic book industry as a professional color artist. I've worked for Marvel and DC on titles like Superman, Batman, Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, Hulk, and many others. In this video, we're going to discuss one of the books I worked on, the Man of Steel himself, Superman. Now, just to add some context, the last time I worked on Superman was for the launch of the New 52. I was a part of the creative, which was comprised of George Perez, Jesus Marino, and Nicola Scott. So this is all coming from my perspective as a working pro in the comics industry, and with this amazing character directly. Superman may be the Man of Steel, but in the hands of Warner Brothers, he's turned awfully rusty over the last dozen or so years. As I'll explain in this video, these big companies and the SJW staff and corporate suits they've brought in to manage their characters, which they consider nothing more than assets on a balance sheet, don't know anything about Superman. And that was confirmed once again recently. A couple of weeks ago, we saw a tweet from DC Comics and Warner Brothers, both using Superman as a political prop to not only push political correctness, but also push a clear political agenda. Because let's face it, the timing was just too perfect given what's going on at the US southern border, and it just so happened to be World Refugee Day. Let's take a look at these two tweets, which were worded exactly the same. The tweet reads, "Superman always stands up for what's right. Did you know he's a refugee? Refugees contribute to the fabric of our society. Stand on the right side of history this World Refugee Day. Hashtag stand with refugees and at the IRC." This isn't the first time that DC and Warner Brothers has decided to politicize and weaponize Superman to fight the culture war. Back in 2011, we saw Superman renounce his US citizenship to become a citizen of the world. Then in Action Comics number 900, we saw Superman, who used to stand for truth, justice, and the American way, drop the American way as part of renouncing his US citizenship because of his disgust with US foreign policy. I'm surprised they took that step with Obama running the country. Maybe DC still had some intestinal fortitude back in 2011. Then came 2017, where we saw Superman protecting illegal immigrants at the border from a bunch of white Americans. This recent attempt to use Superman to drive a political narrative from the regressive left is nothing new, and at this point, it's what we have come to expect from the so-called modern purveyors of entertainment. However, this recent tweet was an obvious shot at President Trump and the current migrant and refugee crisis going on at our southern border, where thousands of people from all over the world are attempting to enter our country illegally. DC and Warner Brothers are using Superman, one of the largest and most recognizable brands in the world, as leverage to frame a political narrative. That narrative being, if you don't stand with Superman and his fellow refugees, you're not standing up for what's right. And you're on the wrong side of history. Being on the wrong side of history for the regressive left usually means you must be a racist, a bigot, or a Nazi, like Trump. Well, let me rephrase that. Calling you one of those terms might have been good enough in 2017, but I think it's pretty obvious that now the left thinks you're all three at the same time. These tweets got me to thinking about what Superman really stands for at its core, and why I don't think he would approve the clear lawlessness going on at the US southern border. My first introduction to Superman was the Richard Donner 1978 classic, Superman the Movie. I saw this before I ever read my first Superman comics, so this was my first impression of the character. This movie is incredibly powerful and iconic on many levels, and because of this, it continues to frame my generation's conception of the character and remains the gold standard 40 years later. In Donner's movie, as we see in the comics, Superman, just a baby, crash lands in a rocket ship in Smallville, which just so happens to be in the heartland of America, an area of America the coastal elites refer to as flyover country. Let's also point out that baby Superman isn't smuggled across the border by a coyote or used as a prop by human traffickers. Superman is adopted by Martha and Jonathan Kent and raised as an American. Given he is raised American means his moral underpinning is based in Western culture and Western values. Western culture and values stem from Judeo-Christian values. Western culture and values are steeped in individual liberty, freedom, private property, the rule of law, equal opportunity, and last but not least, God. We see first signs of this in the wonderful scene where Lois interviews Superman for the very first time. Let's check out that clip right now.
I mean, why are you here? There must be a reason for you to be here.
Yes, I'm here to fight for truth and justice in the American way.
You're going to end up fighting every elected official in this country.
Truth, justice, and the American way. Powerful words anchored in Western culture and Western values. These are core American precepts. It got me thinking about what he meant when he said truth, justice, and the American way. I associate the American way with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are guaranteed rights granted by God to every American citizen, detailed in the Declaration of Independence. Truth and justice are references to the rule of law, as well as equal justice under the law. Again, another core American precept. Truth and justice, or the rule of law, is what yields the American way. Without the rule of law, there is no American way of which we are guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Without the rule of law, we have chaos, like Mexico and parts south. Laws are the restraints that keep America a free and open society. What makes us different than other countries that have no presence of law and order is that they are a nation of men, with one set of laws for the elites and another set of laws for everyone else. Whereas in America, we are the opposite of a nation of men. We are instead a nation of laws, where everyone is subject to the same laws and guaranteed equal justice under the law. It's not always perfect, but it's the best system in the history of the world, and part of that evidence is the fact that everyone wants to come to the United States. Most of the migrants and refugees on the border are fleeing lawless countries ruled by tyrannical despots, tin-horn dictators, or the drug cartels, where there is no presence of the rule of law. Without the rule of law, commerce cannot take place. Without commerce taking place, people are unable to make a living. They see a better life in America because of not only opportunity and jobs, but also the mechanism which yields those things, the strong presence of rule of law, which we get via our Constitution and through our judicial system. Unfortunately, for far too many of them, a better life in America is one centered on government benefits or criminal activity. Without the rule of law, societies collapse into chaos. All you have to do is look to countries like Cuba, Venezuela, El Salvador, and others. What's going on at the U.S. border is just a symptom of the root cause, and that root cause is a combination of two things. Failed states like Venezuela, which are ruled by corrupt dictators, and gross inaction by the U.S. Congress over the last 30 years to enforce and protect the U.S. border and to streamline the immigration policies to meet modern times. So we have millions of people fleeing lawless countries to come to America, where we have a strong presence of rule of law, and yet they try to enter this country lawlessly. Part of coming to America is the desire to be American and assimilate. Part of assimilation is playing by the rules and not violating the law, because the idea is that you understand that it's the presence of laws which differentiate America from the countries these refugees and migrants are currently fleeing. Funny enough, Superman's greatest superpower is not his super strength, not his ability to fly, not his heat vision, not his X-ray vision, nor his near invulnerability. His greatest superpower has always been that he chose to assimilate into American society. Superman is not only a refugee, but an interplanetary refugee. But regardless, he chose to not only assimilate into the human species, but more importantly, he chose to be American. With Superman's demigod-like powers, he could have chosen to rule the earth as a Kryptonian king, yet he chose instead to be an American. Growing up, he fell in love with America, and he embraced American culture and the American way of life. He's first and foremost a law-abiding guy. He walks and talks like an American, he behaves and dresses and eats like an American. He even falls in love with America's sweetheart and official first-wave feminist, Lois Lane. Clark even set out on a career in journalism, which when Superman was created was a noble profession about defending the weak and speaking truth to power. Superman was a real journalist, not a mouthpiece for the Clinton campaign or a BuzzFeed blogger swilling Soylent as he churns out blog posts about the top 5 actors to threaten the life of the president's children. But seriously, Superman's life is pure Americana, which is another reason why we love the Big Blue Boy Scout. Circling back to Superman and DC and Warner Brothers' attempt to cast him as some kind of social justice warrior who sides with the current growing number of refugees and migrants trying to enter the U.S. illegally. The Superman I grew up with would see the crisis at the border, like I said before, as a symptom of a larger problem. That larger problem is the failed, lawless countries these people are fleeing. He would sympathize with their plight, but he would also encourage them to seek asylum in the U.S. the legal way, so as to uphold the rule of law and keep the chaos from escalating. For some, he would encourage them to return to their country of origin and help change it for the better, so future generations don't have to flee to America. And I'm sure he would be willing to help them make that change in their own countries. Superman would also acknowledge that not all refugees and migrants are equal. Let's not forget the other Kryptonians who have shown up to Earth in Superman's past. Generals Zod, Non, and Ursa escaped the Phantom Zone in Superman 2 and made their way to Earth with the intention of conquering it and all of mankind. First by taking the moon, and then by taking the White House. A similar scenario in Zack Snyder's Man of Steel saw General Zod leading a small military unit of Kryptonian warriors in an attempt to conquer the Earth by terraforming it into Krypton, and in the process, annihilating all indigenous life on Earth. If General Zod, Non, and Ursa were the Kryptonian version of MS-13 in Superman 2, then what we got in Man of Steel with General Zod and company were a Kryptonian ISIS. Those kinds of refugees and migrants, along with Islamic terrorists and MS-13, I think we can all agree we want to keep out of the good old US of A. Superman would also respect the fact that America is a sovereign nation by way of the Constitution, which the people of this country adopted long before he ever crash-landed here. The founders understood that without sovereignty, America would never truly be an independent nation, with all of the same rights and powers that other nations enjoy. As Washington said to Hamilton, if a foreign power can tell America what we shall do and what we shall not do, we have independence yet to seek. Superman would acknowledge that the founders did not pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to fight a war against a king, so that 200 plus years later, the US would bend to the desires of corrupt world leaders, foreign bureaucrats, international lawyers, and globalist billionaires. Sovereignty is just as important today as it was in 1776, if not more. Plus, Superman would understand that a country with no borders, no security, and no sovereignty is not a country. Because of this, Superman would respect and advocate for the adhering to the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and upholding and enforcing the rule of law. Because it's the American people who adopted those documents, and it's the American people who then adopted him. It's America who rescued him, and it's America who created him. He would reject the idea of no borders, no nations, because it contradicts the founding principles of the country he was raised in. But he would also realize that the idea of no nations, no borders also leads to societal unrest, nihilism, and anarchy. And considering that in a recent CBS poll, 64% of Americans want illegal aliens sent home, I would expect Superman to respect the will of the American people and their duly elected representatives in Congress. He would stay above the fray of politics and allow the American people to govern themselves. He would respect us enough to work it out on our own. And frankly, my favorite Superman stories are when he's defending mankind from larger threats, like Brainiac and Lex Luthor, not wading into political social commentary, especially when it advocates for lawless behavior. Truth, justice, and the American way is not just lip service, nor should it be forgotten or watered down in any way. It's at the core of the character, and not only focuses on what makes him unique, but it also focuses on his unique connection and inseparable bond with America and Western culture. Over the years, DC and Warner Brothers have forgotten who the character of Superman truly is, and we see that again in these recent tweets. We have seen it over the years as the SJW crowd has sunk their teeth into the character, brainwashing so many fans into thinking that he is this natural social justice warrior. This is why it's so important that we in the Comicsgate movement never forget who the character truly is and where he comes from. He's an American creation, brought to fruition by two Jewish creatives forged from Western culture and Western values.
I'm here to fight for truth and justice in the American way.
Truth, justice, and the American way are just as real and relevant to the character today as it was back in 1978 when Christopher Reeve stated those beautiful words without hesitation. Fortunately, there is enough canon established in the comics, movies, and TV over the last 75 years which still reveal these truths about the character. Superman is not a social justice warrior. He is a warrior for justice. And believe me, those are completely opposite things. Social justice warriors chase after a skewered nightmare of equality, that results in them holding the power and fun being against the law. Superman stood for actual justice, and like the millions upon millions of people who have immigrated to America over the years, he recognized that this country represents Earth's greatest hope for both freedom and mankind. Superman may be an alien, but he's as American as baseball and apple pie, and not to mention Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. Great talking with all of you. If you like this video and want more, spread the word far and wide. Trust me, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook are not going to put this in front of people. The next video I plan to do a behind-the-scenes look at Jawbreaker's page 1 artwork. I will also talk about how I broke into the comic industry, which is a great story involving Brian Pulido and Chaos Comics. So tune in next time, and remember to subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notification. Until then, I'm Brett Smith, and we've just added a little color to the issues of the day with Full Spectrum Culture, where culture is rarely in black and white. Thanks everyone, and speak to you soon.